Hi again, Sophie Glenn here, and here's one last table saw video. So this one's just going to clear up a couple of things that maybe got missed in some of the other videos, but it should be a relatively quick one. So what I wanted to discuss first, I'll move this out of the way, was a bevel gauge, which I briefly talked about in, I believe, the crosscut video, but just to show you what it actually is, just this little tool right here. And it's got a little lock on it, so you can actually use it to measure whatever angle you need to cut at, right? So you could measure it at 90 degrees if you needed to, or you can go to some other odd angle, right? And then to set it up on the table saw, you could just adjust this as needed. So say I need it to be that angle. And then using the wheel on the left side of the machine, I could adjust that accordingly. And just so you know that when you are measuring this, you want to make sure that the blade is resting in between the teeth and not actually on the teeth, because if it's resting on the teeth, then that can actually throw the measurement off a little bit. So that's the same rule applies to both the bevel gauge here and also the combination square here, right? So that's that. So I'll set this aside for just a second. Another thing I wanted to mention, I just wanted to briefly show you how the digital miter gauge works. So again, this guy. So there's two buttons on here. One says on off and one says 0. So if you turn this on, right, I'll have a little green light on it, and if I put it up against the table, what it'll do is it'll measure, it'll zero out on the table. So if I press the 0 button here, that'll be at 0. Then if I raise this blade up, so now that I know that it's 0 to the table, now I can put it up against the blade and see what measurement it's at. So right now it's 91.7, so it wasn't a direct measurement from before because I was just kind of eyeballing it. But now I can adjust it so that it's exactly 90 degrees. So again, I'll use the one on the left here. And I can just very narrowly adjust it until it's right at 90.0. So right now it's just perfect. So again, I can just zero it out on the table again, just to be doubly sure. So right now it's at 0, and then the magnets will attach it onto the blade itself, and it should read at more or less at 90. So that's how the digital miter gauge works. All right. One last thing. So both of my pieces of wood that I used for the crosscut and rip cut demos were relatively thin. They were about 3/4 of an inch. So there are going to be instances where you have thicker pieces of wood, like my thick piece of poplar right here. So this is roughly a 2-inch thick board, and this could cut it in one felt swoop. You could do that in theory. Because poplar is relatively soft, it probably would go through the table saw relatively easily in one pass. But depending on the type of wood you're using, so say you're using like a hard maple or an oak, something that's a lot more dense and hard than poplar, then it might be best to actually if you're doing a rip cut specifically, to cut it in 2 passes. So for instance, what you might want to do is, so you'll need to lower that blade obviously so it's just clearing those gullets, so right around there. So well, okay. So actually what you'll need to do here, you'll actually raise this blade up so it's just cutting just above halfway through your piece of wood, right? So that's set up like that. So what you'll do in this case, so I have 2 flat faces now. So both my top face and my bottom face are flat, and that was done joiner planer. So if you haven't seen those, you can watch those videos. So I have one and I have one flat edge here, so I want to clean up this edge. So what I would do is I'd set up this saw blade so it's cutting through just above half this thickness. So what I'll do is I'll do one pass going all the way through this way, right? And then I'll flip it around so that the same edge is facing the fence, and do the same thing going the other way. So that should be able to get that nice and flat. And if it's a tiny bit off, maybe the wood moved a little bit, or you didn't necessarily start out with a very flat edge, even though that's what you're supposed to do, you can also clean that up on the joiner. So as long as, once you get that flat edge on there, then you should be able to clean it up from there. So just a couple of addendums to that. That's pretty much it.